Now, folks, I want to give you an example of what's going on in this country when they pass these massive bills. The media refuse to dig into these bills and tell us what's in them. Well, we have a few reports. And all you're going to hear all day and all night from the network news programs is financial reform bill was passed. You'll hear Obama with his phony statements that a collapse will never happen again, a bailout of Wall Street will never happen again. They are passing these mammoth bills with thousands of pages, all kinds of references to other things, which people are writing behind the scenes and in the shadows. Obama hasn't read a single one. The news media haven't read any of them, for the most part. And it's like, and we just go along. It just keeps happening. Next it'll be cap and trade. And the myriad of laws and rules and prohibitions and demands, the enormous power being granted to unelected individuals on panels and committees and new departments, it's mind-boggling. And it's intentional. That's why they pass these massive bills. Shame on the news media in this country. Well, the Washington Times has done a good job. Patrice Hill. Now, this bill just passed. And you can thank Scott Brown because he led the way. Otherwise, it could have been stopped. And then, of course, the two dodo birds from Maine followed right behind. Hey, if he's doing it, we better too. I guarantee you Susan Collins did not read this bill. I guarantee you Olympia Snowe didn't read it. I guarantee you Scott Brown didn't. But you put the word reform on it, and it sounds great, particularly the liberal Republicans in New England and liberal Republicans all over the country. Now, Hill writes the financial reform bill. Now, you now are going to learn more about this bill than anybody else has told you, than anybody else knows. The financial reform bill expected to clear Congress this week, which it just did, is chock full of provisions that have little to do with the financial crisis, but cater to the long-standing agendas of labor unions and other democratic interest groups. Principal among them is a measure to make it easier for unions, environmental groups, and other activist organizations that hold shares to put their representatives on the boards of directors of every corporation in America. Did you know that? Now, do we get to go on their boards? No. The so-called proxy access provision, which activist groups say they will use to try to improve oversight of corporate financial practices, has provoked a backlash from the Business Roundtable, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and other major non-Wall Street business groups. The slow but certain takeover of private sector. Divvying it up, parceling it out, nationalizing it. Absolutely incredible. We have Republicans voting for this, only a few, but still they did. And this they call reform. This has nothing to do with what's happened to this economy. Business groups are also rankled that the legislation imposes costly new burdens on airlines. Airlines, by the way, that are hurting. Utilities and other non-financial businesses that were victims rather than villains in the crisis simply because they use financial derivatives to hedge their businesses against risks such as fluctuations in oil prices, interest rates, and currencies. And by the way, this goes for farmers too. Such hedging practices played no role in the crisis, though they helped many businesses weather the financial turbulence and recession that followed in the aftermath of the Wall Street storm. All derivatives aren't bad, ladies and gentlemen. Those that are built in a house of cards, yes. Now listen to this. The bill creates more than 20 offices of minority and women inclusion, quote unquote, at Treasury, the Federal Reserve, and other government agencies to ensure they employ more women and minorities and grant more federal contracts to more women and minority-owned businesses. They have a quota system in this bill. Not only is that unconstitutional, not only is that repugnant, Has nothing to do with financial reform. The agencies also would apply fair employment tests, quote unquote, to the banks and other financial institutions they regulate, though their hiring and contracting practices had nothing to do with the 2008 financial crisis. The interjection of racial and gender preferences into America's financial sector deserves greater media exposure before Congress debates and passes the bill, said Kevin Mooney, contributing editor for Americans for Limited Government's daily newsletter. Too late, they passed it. The powerful new Consumer Protection Agency. Whenever you hear these phrases, be very, very, careful what you believe. Reform, consumer protection. The powerful new Consumer Protection Agency, that is the centerpiece of the reform bill, listen to this, also would provide substantial employment opportunities and funding for democratic and social activist groups such as the Association of Community Organizers for Reform Now, or ACORN, critics say. Rather than focus on the abuses in the mortgage lending market that led to the crisis, the new consumer agency would have broad-ranging powers to regulate and punish virtually any company that has a financial relationship with consumers, even those that had nothing to do with the crisis, said Senator Richard Selby, Alabama Republican. He said he sought to craft a more tailored role for the agency in weeks of negotiation over the Senate bill. He said, quote, during our negotiations on the consumer bureaucracy, my Democrat friends were not focused on the mortgage market. Their sights were set on the rest of the economy. The new bureaucracy is an enormous reach across virtually every segment of our economy, a massive expansion of government influence in our daily financial lives, he said. Reform, right, folks? Why don't we just change the word Marxism to reform? Reformism. Senator Bob Corker, a Tennessee Republican, who also sought to help write a bipartisan bill more narrowly focused on the problems that led to the crisis, said he fears that an activist director of the consumer agency could actually use agency power to direct loans to favored constituencies, regardless of whether the loans are sound or pose risk to the banking system. Gee, I thought that's what Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac had done. Corker said, this may sound a little far-fetched, but you can have the wrong person in this position. There's no board. There's no check and balance. You can imagine they could use this organization to create social justice in the financial system. Ladies and gentlemen, this bill massively increases the federal government's role in private business. Let me put it to you that way. Opens the door wide to turning over management to Democrat constituent groups, to turning over the running of the companies to Democrat constituent groups by order of the United States federal government. It does nothing about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are stealing you blind upwards of $150 billion. You talk about a gusher, it's those two. They had a huge role in the financial demise of this nation because Democrats used them as playthings. Democrats ran them. Democrats made tens of millions of dollars running those organizations. And they're not even addressed in this reform bill. The airlines, utility companies, businesses of all sorts, enormous power to this consumer agency, which has the power to direct loans, quota systems for the private sector, 2,400 pages of smothering, destroying regulations. Do you think this is going to create jobs? No. It's going to chase business and jobs overseas. Who the hell wants to start a business in this country and deal with all of this crap?